Liger.
Oh, it's
the name,
Liger.
right?
Oh, this is cool. Yeah, shit.
Oh, it's Liger!
Ahoy! Helming in Sea of Thieves is probably one of the hardest roles there is, and that's because there's so many different scenarios and circumstances that it can really be overwhelming, especially for newer helms that are trying to keep calm under pressure and put their team in positions to win fights. Initially, when you guys requested a helm guide, I really hadn't helmed too much beforehand, and I just really had to take my time and basically learn helm from the ground up. So in this guide, I'm bringing back everything that I learned to provide tips to help you win more fights. Some things I'm going to go over are skills good helms need to succeed, basic roles of a helm, some general do's and don'ts, and ship specific tips. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So what are some qualities I typically see in good helms? Most of the time they're a strong leader, taking charge and guiding their team in fights.
You're a little ahead of me. That one should serve it.
They're also normally good at multitasking, adjusting sails, adjusting wheel, sniping cannon line, squeezing in repairs when possible, and checking your map for boundaries and islands. And because the helm can't do everything, you have to have trust in your teammates to do their roles and give them the confidence they need to do so.
Okay, got it. I mean, you're right. Border, you got that, you got that.
Helms also must be able to predict events before they happen based on what's going on in the fight.
As soon as you hear board, you guys go up. Go, go, go.
They're really far.
Another good skill helms need to know is prioritizing tasks, making sure your teammates are efficient and they always know what to do at all times. On sloop and brig, it's normally the helm's job to also bilge, so you need to be good at managing pressure, knowing when to bucket or repair, depending on if your cannoner has a good angle or not, if the wheel or a mast need repairs, and these are things you have to practice and get a feel for. Good helms typically should have good awareness and notice details in a fight, like if the enemy sends borders, if they aren't all cannoning, which may mean they have a lot of holes, or other things that may help you make a good decision during the fight.
Oh, nice ball. He's not gonna get that res. You can go over it.
So now we're getting into some of the responsibilities of a helm, and one of the main ones is making sure your teammates' life is as easy as possible by keeping them from doing anything other than cannon or do whatever their specific role is. And one way to make your teammates' life easier is not going northwest. Northwest waves are notorious for being the worst, and when you're on cannons, it's definitely a lot harder to aim because your cannon's constantly dipping down and then going back up. Instead, what you can do is anytime there's an island nearby, if you sail by the island, it always has calm waves and it makes it definitely a lot easier for your cannoners to be more consistent. One way you can assist your cannoner while on helm is send snipes at the enemy's cannon line. This is especially helpful in sloop and brig when there aren't enough cannons for the whole team to fire at the same time.
I hit the cannoner. Better ball him. I hit him again.
So earlier I mentioned that for sloop and brig, the helm is generally the bilge as well. And here I just want to explain kind of what repairs you need to prioritize and why. I would say in most cases, making sure the helm is fully repaired is the most important. Some exceptions to this are if you're about to sink, if a border is on, if the wheel is being targeted by cannons, or if you don't need to turn the wheel because your cannon angle is already good. So just remember, if your mast gets chain shotted and your wheel is broken, or if you're about to lose angle and you just need to adjust wheel, your priority will always be wheel over mast. Mast is the second most important because having a mobile ship is way more valuable than a demasted one. You should try to stay ahead of mast repairs as soon as you hear a crack from a cannonball hitting the mast, or if you hear incoming chain shots. The next priority is holes in your ship, and generally when the enemy cannons your ship, they'll target the cannon line the most, so that means the area under the cannon and the immediate area behind and forward of the cannon will constantly be hit, making it hard to repair. So holes at the center of your boat are typically the hardest to repair, and working out to the front or towards the back, they get progressively easier because they're less likely to get hit. So again, from inside the ship, holes directly under the cannon line will be the hardest to repair, and working away from the cannons, they will get progressively easier. And the same idea holds true to the back holes. The further away from center you get, the easier they are to repair. And a good thing about sloop is as you're getting these repairs, you can see out the window to make sure your angle is good and you're not overturning or underturning. So following that same mindset, the holes at the very front and the holes at the very back will be the next easiest to repair. And lastly, the easiest holes to repair will be any holes on the off side. So if I'm taking a broad on the left side, all of the holes on the right side will be the easiest to repair. So another sloop tip is it's better to take fights on your left side because there are less possible holes on the left side of your ship. On the left, there are 7 possible holes. And on the right, there are 8. And it doesn't seem like a big deal, but having one extra tier 3 can make a big difference in pressure. So another reason the left side fights are better on sloop is because if you do get demasted, the mast falls to the right. This can get in the way of your cannoner, causing your cannons to hit the end of your mast, and if you just take left side fights, you don't really have to worry about that. So the same idea holds true for brig. The back mast falls to the right. The front you don't really have to worry about for cannons, but for the rear cannon and the front cannon, that back mast will get in the way. And by taking left side broads, both the front left cannon and the back left cannon are clear from obstructions. And on brig, if you get a hole in this back left corner right here, you don't have to walk all the way around the table to repair it. You can simply just look through the window and get the repair here. And in my bilge guide, I did mention this, but if you're at the front getting repairs and you need a bucket, you can great bail. Now, it is a little tricky because you have to aim a little bit lower than you would think. About right here is where you want the center of your screen. And a majority of the time, if you're helm bilging on brig, you're generally moving, so in order to not backsplash on the left, you want to aim right at that lamp. Now Galleon is the only odd ship out. The middle mast does fall on the left, so you could argue taking right side broads could be better on Galleon, since the mast falling to the left could get in the way of your cannoners, but on Galleon it isn't crazy bad unless you're taking long shots. So the back mast does fall to the right, which is kind of a double-edged sword because it does get in the way, but the mast could also save you from getting one-balled. And lastly, the front mast does fall to the right, so harpoon turns to the right are out of question unless you have somebody pull the mast up for you. So another responsibility of helms is to res your teammates as long as it's safe to do so. And when you're losing a fight and need to focus on repairs, it's important to know when to peel, which is based on each helms individually, based on how much pressure they can take. And if you do end up peeling, it almost always means the enemy ship's going to send boarders or chain shots. So when peeling, I want to go over some of the best positions you and your crew should be in to be ready for boarders and chain shots. As helm, you should be ready at the wheel to catch the mast if it falls from chain shots. This spot's really good to be in if they send boarders and they overshoot because you can see them from here and you're already by ladders ready to ladder guard. For your main cannon, they should be right here because if the mast does get chain shotted, it's easy to stay on top of repairs, and they have line of sight from incoming cannons so they can give you dodge comms if you're about to get one balled. You can also see incoming boarders and you can be ready for them just in case they deck shot or if they grab ladder. So your positions for brig are similar. Generally the helm is by wheel. And from here, if they send any boarders, you can see if they overshoot and you can be ready for them once they grab ladders. And you're also responsible for catching backmast just in case it gets chain shot. So on brig, your second cannon is normally bucketing if you're peeling, and from here you can bail the water relatively safely without having to worry about getting one balled, and you can grab repairs on the backmast if it gets chain shotted. Now from here, you should be bucket watching, which is grabbing buckets and looking at ladders ready to kill boarders. Now main cannon's a little different, they should be positioned right here by the anchor, and from here you're responsible for front mast. If it gets chain shotted, you should go ahead and catch it. And you're also defending anchor from boarders. There's so many times even good crews are not expecting this and they'll just sprint straight at me while I'm guarding anchor, and it's an easy kill. So in Galleon, when you're peeling, typically the bilge is downstairs because you have a lot of pressure, so that's where they'll be. But that doesn't mean that they can't help defend against boarders. Like I mentioned in my bilge guide, a lot of times you can hear if boarders grab ladder from down here. You can also be ready to snipe them as soon as they get to the top of the ladder. And here's the boarder's point of view, and rarely do they ever expect this. So galleons are great because this backmast can protect you from getting one balled on helm. So as helm, you're responsible for backmast, keeping it up if it gets chain shotted. And from here, you're so high up, it's really easy to see incoming boarders and defending against them. So here's where your flex should be. Galleons are really great because the captain's quarters behind you protects you from incoming cannonballs. You also want to stay away from grate to keep your bilge from backsplashing on you. So when you're going to defend against a boarder, you want to be mindful of that grate and just run around it instead of running straight across it. The flex is also responsible for repairing and catching mid-mast just in case it gets chain shotted, and you can also ladder guard from here as well. Just watch out on your left side because this is typically where your bilge will throw the water. And lastly, just like the brig, the main cannon will play ank, and they're also responsible for catching and repping that front mast. And the reason you play ank is because 9 times out of 10, when someone boards your boat, they're going straight to your anchor, and having someone here, they never expect it, and it can be a free insta-kill. Now, if for whatever reason you're peeling and you're dry down low, the bilge can stand right here and almost play ank with the main cannoner. Now as a helm, it's very important to understand what Blunder Info is. Blunder Info is essentially knowing how the enemy ship will move if it's hit by a blunder bomb. If you haven't already seen it, Tato and Sterling did a great video about it that you should definitely go check out. But essentially the way to know how an enemy ship will react to blunder bombs is if you hit the nose of the ship with a blunder bomb, it will turn the nose towards Sea Dog Tavern. And if you hit the back of the boat with the blunder bomb, it'll turn the back of the boat towards Sea Dog Tavern. This information can be clutch if you've been fighting a boat and you have a lot of holes on one side of the boat and you want to rotate their boat and start putting holes on the other side. And in most cases, this is an insta-sink. And lastly, helms need to be really good with communication, not just barking orders at your team, but making sure everyone's on the same page.
I hear one's in the water, one's in the water. Go, 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 go.
Yeah.
Where is
W?
it? Which side, which side?
Oh, right side.
Go,
Right side.
go, go, go.
He's dead.
Watch out for that ladder. I'm gonna go left. Did you get back?
No.
So now I want to talk about some universal do's and don'ts. Do not nose the boat. If you don't know what this is, it's when you point the nose of your boat at the enemy's cannons, and this is the worst position you can put your boat in, and it makes it really easy for the enemy to chain shot your masts, cannon players on the top deck, slam lowers. If you do this, it's almost always guaranteed that the enemy will send a boarder. Instead, you should approach a fight in one of two ways. Now the first is an orbital, which as the name suggests is when both of you and the enemy boat turn into opposite directions, and it forces you to perpetually rotate each other until someone gets demasted, peels, or sinks. As a newer Helm, this type of engagement seemed a little bit more difficult because you have to constantly manage your speed, your cannon angle, while also watching the enemy's boat to adjust for their speed and their turn angle. And you also have to watch out for boarders that might get knocked off the enemy's boat. And because you're turning in a circle, it almost will always mean that they'll probably board you. So the other approach is a parallel, which is when both boats turn the same direction and sail parallel with each other. And as a newer Helm, this type of engagement is much easier because you really just have to get parallel with the other ship, straighten wheel, and match the enemy's speed. But some things you have to be mindful of are the boundaries and watching out for islands or rocks. You also want to try to avoid taking parallels going northwest. A tip for practicing orbitals and keeping that angle is to just find a C-post or some stationary rock and rotate it going different speeds. And what I like to do is use something on the ship like the banister or some beam or even the lantern and make sure I'm keeping that right in line with whatever it is I'm trying to rotate. And another tip for this is anytime I'm overturning or underturning, I'll adjust wheel, kind of count how many spokes or pegs on the wheel I turn. And after a little while, you start kind of getting used to it, and you can sort of guess how far you have to turn based on how fast you're going or the enemy ship is going. Now, after a while, if neither ship peels or sinks, the fight's going to go one of three ways. You will demast them, which means you should immediately slow down to give your cannoners easier shots. I know Kaijoy said that Death Circle is overrated, but here you should immediately start to wrap their ship with a Death Circle. Although you do need to be careful when you're in the broadside of the enemy and dodge those cannons. And the reason I say you should Death Circle is any good crew nowadays can turtle, so cannoning one side of the ship is probably not going to be enough to sink most good crews. So another way the fight could go is if they demast you, and in this situation, before you ever try to even catch mast, you want to make sure that the wheel is turned so that you can keep cannon angle, and when you go to raise your mast, your cannoner can keep pressure on the enemy. So if they demast you and your wheel is busted and you won't be able to get angle, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and turtle and go for a double snipe on the cannoner, or kill the enemy boarder and repair the wheel to get angle to retake the fight. So the third possibility is kind of rare, but it's definitely one of the more fun scenarios for me, and that's if both ships get demasted. And at this point, you're really in a race with the other ship to see who messes up first. So the first team to get a mast up, the first team to one-ball the other team, double snipe the other team, or blunder the other boat out of angle will typically win that fight. So a tip to res your teammate is to wait for the enemy to cannon and immediately go for the res after that cannon passes. Start the res and look up and be ready to dodge incoming cannonballs. You don't have to stay looking at the revive prompt for the entirety of the res for it to work. So some things you want to avoid are leaving the zone if you're in the dive match, and this also extends to ramming islands and rocks. And unless you're peeling, you're also going to want to avoid losing angle for your cannoner. Next, you're going to want to avoid getting bagged by a cannonball, and a lot of people seem to think that this is kind of a fluke thing or it's just something you can't really help, but I disagree. This is 100% an awareness thing, and just positioning yourself or being mindful of incoming cannons will make you that much better at not getting bagged. So the next thing you want to avoid is letting a demasted ship or a ship that you kind of had the upper hand on get away. What this does is basically all that work you put in, cannoning, chain shotting them, putting all that pressure on them, if they get away, it essentially erases all that progress like it didn't even happen. And lastly, you want to avoid giving the enemy angle on the opposite side of your boat after already taking a fight on one side. This is because you're able to recover from one full side lowers, but having two full sides is very hard to come back from.